I'm Adam Gorham, and you're listening to the True North Country Comics Podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics Podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book and graphic novel creators and supporters. I'm John Swinimer. If you want to drop me a line, you can contact me at john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. On this episode, I chat with Adam Gorham about The Blue Flame, Godzilla, and much more. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. It's also available on the True North Country Comics channel on YouTube. I invite you to like and subscribe. Adam works and resides in Mississauga, Ontario. His career in comics began in 2008 with work on various indie efforts. In recent years, he's worked for publishers like Valiant Entertainment, IDW Publishing, Archie Comics, and Marvel Comics for just a few of the various projects such as Rocket, New Mutant, Dead Souls. In addition to illustrating many covers for comic books, his current projects include The Blue Flame from Vault Comics and Godzilla Rivals vs. King Ghidorah from IDW Publishing. The Blue Flame is described as a story of a cosmic hero and a DIY vigilante that fights crime on the streets of Milwaukee. The Blue Flame is a blue-collar HVAC repairman named Sam Brusum. In the wake of a horrific tragedy, the boundaries of the Blue Flame's identity blur even further. Now, before a universal trial, the Blue Flame must prove that humanity is worth saving. But in order to do that, Sam Brusum has to save himself. Godzilla Rivals vs. King Ghidorah goes like this. When Mars invades Earth, Godzilla surfaces from Tokyo Bay and is pulled into battle. Captured and taken by the Martians, Godzilla is forced to fight in a gladiatorial arena where he faces his biggest challenge yet, King Ghidorah. And so, without further ado, here's my chat with Adam Gorham about The Blue Flame, Godzilla, and much more. So, Adam Gorham, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Appreciate your time. Before we get started, I wanted to ask, what is on your bedside reading table? What are you reading today?
Oh, man, too many things. It's actually the height of my reading stack is getting, it's giving me vertigo. I've recently decided, because at home, my family and I, we watched the Lord of the Rings trilogy and then the Hobbit trilogy, and it got me thinking how I have not yet read the Silmarillion to completion. So I just, this past weekend, acquired my dad's old copy, and I started reading that again. And it's less impenetrable so far than it had been previously. So I'm not very deeply in, but I'm grasping I'm grasping it rather than, before it was, I found it really hard to get into. But this time around, I'm enjoying it.
Good.
Comic-wise, a variety of things, partly for work, for things that I'm doing, and just things that are coming out currently that I'm keeping up with, and then just things that have caught my interest. So I picked up some copies of the Dark Horse miniseries Robocop versus Terminator by Frank Miller and Walter Simonson. So I read that recently, and I keep going back through it because I just adore the art. But I got it because I truly love crossovers. I love when IPs, I love the idea and the spirit of it. It got me thinking how when I was growing up, and crossover comics were some of the reasons that I got excited about reading comics as a kid. Predator versus Aliens being one of them. Dark Horse was like, they had all their hands on the licensed stuff, so they were big for that. And again, as a movie lover and a comic lover, it was like, all of your junk foods in the same bowl. So Robocop versus Terminator was one that I'd been aware of for a long time, but had never actually read. And what's kind of interesting is, as I was looking back through these various crossovers, they had some prestigious teams like Frank Miller and Walter Simonson on Robocop versus Terminator. There's a Judge Dredd Batman book called Die Laughing that had, Glenn Fabry and, oh my gosh, I forget the other dude's name. But it's just this beautiful painted comic. And so, they had some cool people on those. And then what's current, this past week I picked up issue 5 of Primordial by Jeff Lemire and Andrea Sorrentino and Dave Stewart. I'm keeping up with Marvel's Eternals by Kieran Gillen and Esad Ribic. A Righteous Thirst for Vengeance I'm also keeping up with. It's like another apart from the Violent, which I drew and co-created with Ed Brisson. This is the only other crime comic set in Vancouver that I'm aware of.
Wow. Okay.
So pretty cool. And that's by Rick Remender and Andre Lima Arujo. And then issue 8 of The Silver Coin, created and illustrated by Michael Walsh. And this particular issue is written by Matthew Rosenberg, who I worked with on New Mutants Dead Souls.
Right, yeah. Cool.
And then I also picked up issue 3 of Regarding the Matter of Oswald's Body, which from Boom Studios, which is written by my co-creator in The Blue Flame, Christopher Cantwell.
There you go. Yes. That is a great segue into our next question, which is about The Blue Flame. I want to congratulate you on all the positive response you've been getting about that book. That series. You. That's tremendous. So for those perhaps who've been living under a rock and not familiar with the story, how would you describe it to someone?
I've always found The Blue Flame a little tough to describe in a nutshell, just because there are several things going on in it simultaneously. But very basically, The Blue Flame is the name of our superhero. And so by day, his name is Sam Brossum, and he's an HVAC repairman in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And he lives a fairly mild-mannered life, aside from the fact that he is, by night, the Blue Flame, a local hometown self-made superhero. So he's a member of the Night Brigade, which is kind of like, a very small-town version of like the Justice Society. It's all these local superheroes. And that's one story thread that you would follow. And then there's another story thread about the Blue Flame when he's much farther along in his career, and he is abducted and transported far, far, far into the deep reaches of space by tribunal of advanced alien beings, and he's being put on trial for the literal fate of humanity. So this group of advanced beings decide which species and civilizations make it to the next stage of advancement and which don't. And he's literally on trial to try and save humanity from being wiped out of existence.
Wow.
And so the story bounces back between Sam in his early days and Sam in deep cosmic space. And
wow.
And so the 6th issue came out in December, at the end of December, and so we're starting to see those two story threads overlap somewhat. So
very good.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds very intriguing, and again, congrats on that success. Wanted to talk a wee bit about how you and Christopher met up. Like, how did you two get together for this project?
We had a matchmaker in the form of our editor at Vault Comics, Adrian Wassell. I've heard it pronounced both ways. I'm not sure which is correct, and I have not had the nerve to ask directly. But you know how it is when you read a name more often than you ever hear it spoken aloud.
Right. Yes.
But our editor Adrian paired us up for it. So at the time, in early 2020, I began doing cover work for Vault Comics on various titles like No One's Rose and Giga and Bleed Them Dry. And I had such a fun time doing these covers that I wanted to continue working with Vault in some capacity. And we began talking about the possibility of doing a book together. And they had this book kind of in the works for, I guess, a year at that point that they'd been working on with Chris. And they felt that I was the right artist for it. And that's how we got paired up. So I had, some early talks and phone calls with Chris where he told me about the story as he envisioned it. And I read his script, and it was really the quality of his script that compelled me to do the project. So Chris comes from television originally.
Right.
So he's the co-creator of Halt and Catch Fire at AMC, which was a show that I had seen and enjoyed beforehand. So I had confidence in his writing ability. I was aware that he had written some comics as well beforehand. She Can Fly, as well as The Mask and a few other things. He was just starting his run on Iron Man at the time, which is very, 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 very enjoyable. I keep up with that as well. So, but I read his script for this, and it was, I sunk into it so well that it made drawing it easy, like a no-brainer.
Okay.
I could just I could visualize the pages and see myself in the work. It doesn't happen very often. So yeah, it was enough to get me on board. And so it's a 10-issue story. It's got a finite ending, and so we're halfway there. But that's how we got set up, and
Cool.
he's been a pleasure to work with. Yeah,
You don't find that too often, so that's good to hear. Do you think, because he's been working in TV and movies in the past, do you think there's any possibility the Blue Flame could appear in another medium besides comics?
I would like that, but you just never know.
Right,
I'm sure we would all like it, and I certainly think that the Blue Flame is a unique enough story to make an interesting television show or TV miniseries, maybe even a film. It's also not always the most palatable. You know what I mean? So I think people have a certain idea of what a superhero show ought to be. I know that deconstructions of superheroes are still very popular, and different takes on superheroes are probably more interesting than ever. I think at its core, the Blue Flame is a story about the human condition, and I think from that regard, it might be a tougher sell.
Okay,
but I think
fair.
It could make for a very interesting. It would be less something like The Boys and something more like HBO's The Leftovers.
Okay.
We deliver some hard punches in the Blue Flame, and there's nothing happening. But if there would be, that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, time will tell. Well, wanted to talk a wee bit about your other project that you have on the go, an upcoming project called Godzilla Rivals Round 1. In this book, you hinted at this when we met up at Fan Expo, but you said this time you're a writer, which blew me away, because everyone knows you've got great artistic skills, but coming in as a writer is something brand new. So can you divulge a little bit about the story without giving too much away?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a Godzilla story, so I don't know if it's definitely not super plot driven, but Godzilla Rivals, I think it's versus King Ghidorah. That's the title that gets thrown around between me and editorial. But it's a 40-page one-shot, and it's part of a series that IDW has been putting out called Godzilla Rivals. And so in each one-shot, he faces off against one of his famous rival kaiju. So far, there's been Hedorah and Mothra. And so I'm slated next, and it is focusing on King Ghidorah. Pretty much a year ago, I was trying to, combat lockdown blues and kind of got into collecting action figures and collectibles in a way that I never really had before. And so on my shelf, I had this figure of Godzilla and a figure of an alien, of a Martian. And I had this idea, I could just sort of picture it as as a pulp poster of Godzilla fighting a fleet of UFOs with Tokyo in flames in the backdrop, kind of like War of the Worlds meets Godzilla. Okay. And so that was the idea that I had, and I knew that IDW had their hands on the Godzilla license at the time, and I had been doing work for IDW on various things, but specifically the Ninja Turtles, and so I had a good working relationship with the publisher and my editors, and so I was in a position where I could get their ear, and just had to. I was like, how if I wanted to write and pitch a story for a property, how would that go? And so the dance began.
Right.
But long story short, I gave them my idea, and they liked it enough to greenlight it and get something going through various stages in development, as you must with licensed stuff, because Godzilla belongs to Toho, and Toho has a very specific criteria and vision and list of do's and don'ts with Godzilla. So I had to tailor my original concept to make it work. In essence, I'm telling a story where if you're familiar with Godzilla's films, in particular Invasion of the Astro Monster, it's almost a remix on a familiar setup for Godzilla. Okay. And so this is treated as not really a sequel or anything like that, but it's kind of like a standalone tale where we're assuming you're familiar enough with Godzilla, you're in his universe to kind of just go along with what I'm doing. And at the same time, I really am just doing my own thing here. So my main goal with this was I wanted to make a B movie. So, like I'm Ed Wood. I'm making my Plan 9 from outer space. And so it's essentially the Zillions, who are a race of alien beings from the Godzilla universe, show up War of the Worlds style and begin invading the Earth. And that's when they encounter Godzilla. So he faces off against the Zillions and is taken to Mars, where he ultimately faces one of his greatest rivals, King Ghidorah. So with this story, I wanted to do some things that I felt like would be fun to see in any Godzilla movie that I hadn't really seen before. At the same time, kind of doing it like they do in Godzilla movies and movies of this fashion. So for instance, like it's, you get some zanier characters, and, I know that people get kind of fed up with the human characters in these movies and wonder if they're even necessary.
Right.
They are. I'm here to tell you, you need them. But at the same time, I tried to create characters that were kind of on the sillier side of things, it's a little intentionally campy in certain respects, and then hopefully just awesome in other ways. But
yeah. Well, the artwork looks awesome. I tell you, the stuff I've seen thus far is just amazing.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, like I believe I sent you the section where the Zillions invade Earth.
Yeah.
And so
pretty intense.
Yeah, I start with a bang, and I try not to let up. But that's essentially the story that you're in for. So you get some monster action on Earth and then some monster action on Mars.
There you go. Can't ask for anything more than that. That's pretty cool. So the question I would put to you then is, why did it take you so long to take the plunge as a writer?
I guess it's, I ask myself that too. Like I'm kind of at an interesting, now having finally written a comic that's soon to be published, I wonder, what I was afraid of or what was keeping me. And it's hard to say definitely, but, I'm not a stranger to writing. Like I've been working on creator-owned stuff the way I have, started out doing Teuton with my buddy Fred Kennedy, and I had a lot of writing input with that, more so plotting than actual scripting. Right. And then, I've worked on other things where I was able to play the same hand, where it was like, I think we should take this here. And so I've done enough armchair writing and editing. And then I've also, for a long while, was co-writing things with creative partners to pitch that just never really made it off the ground. And in my own spare time, I would get ideas and I'd write them down and I would try to expand upon them. But like anything, writing is a muscle that you have to work at developing. And, I only have so many hours in a day, and those hours are mostly spent, strengthening my artistic muscles.
Sure.
But it could just be the grace of it could have been like, being, in a pandemic and things were slowing down while also speeding up, just this weird pressure cooker of a time and space. I felt like maybe it was something that I could do while doing other things. So, which is to say, maybe I was like fooling myself, but I didn't intend to draw it. So this Godzilla special, I'm writing and illustrating, but when I pitched it as a writer, and I actually expected them to assign an artist to me. And if that was the case, there was like a couple of people specifically I wanted to ask, but they wanted me to draw it as well. That was their condition. So I didn't even get to, I didn't have a choice in the matter. It was like, well, do it if you're drawing it too. That was the big selling point for them, I guess.
Sure, and of course.
Super flattering for me that they put that much faith in me. But no, I have always intended to get into writing at some point. And I've had a number of ideas. And usually what happens is I'll get an idea and I'll bounce it off of a friend. But being an artist, there's a natural assumption that I'm looking for a writer or a co-writer. So it's sort of like I've had to play a few things pretty close to the chest. And then sometimes when I do that, that idea that I've been sitting on, somebody else will do something very similar, maybe better than I would have done, maybe just different. But at the same time, it was like, I had that idea.
Right.
And so there was just a few things where I was like, man, if I had only struck the iron while it was hot in my mind, maybe things could be, different. So this was just, with Godzilla, it was just kind of like I just one day got the nerve to float the idea out, and I guess I thought, like it wasn't, as much. I love Godzilla, and it was something that I really wanted to do just for the pure fun of it. But if it didn't happen, I wouldn't be crushed. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because it
Yeah.
was like, it's still, it's like it's just something that could happen and would be fine because it's not something I own, and it's not something that I can, will be mine and only mine. You know what I mean? So I'd be able to. I knew that I could go on and do other things down the line if this didn't pan
There you
out.
go.
So
Right.
it gave me the courage to ask for it because I guess nothing depended on whether or not it happened or not.
Sure.
And I was just very fortunate in that it did. Yeah. So now that this is done, I'll be continuing to do some writing in an official work for hire capacity. So that's pretty neat.
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of people are going to be happy you did this too. So not just yourself. So thanks for doing that.
No worries.
Well, want to switch gears a wee bit now and talk a bit about the tools you use to create your art, and maybe specifically focusing on the Godzilla book. Did you have any specific tools you used?
Yeah, I did. So recently, actually, since starting the Blue Flame, and really because of the Blue Flame, I started to incorporate an airbrush with some of my pieces. So, and this was because, oddly, because of the pandemic of all things, right? Like when, before the pandemic, I was working on a couple of assignments that I was looking forward to, but like I was at a place with my career where I was trying to think of how I could do things differently, how I could sort of, just basically freshen up my style or maybe discover something new. Like it's like I had some molting to do artistically. And then when the pandemic really gripped the world, I remember in March of 2020, like the assignments that I had at the time pretty much vaporized.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah,
Yeah,
pencils down. That was what they called it.
Exactly. So I got the pencils down orders, and so it was just one of these things where I could feel probably like other artists as well, but like the opportunities in the ground beneath their feet begin to shrink, and so like I had kind of a personal crisis of like there's, I guess, if they're making fewer comics, then there will be a scarcity of work, and they're only going to give work to people who will sell books. Will I be one of those people? How do I make myself a person who is marketable, who people will want to read? So it was one of those things. And so I was looking for ways to reinvigorate myself, to get myself excited about my artwork going forward, but also get others excited as well. And, I decided to give the airbrushing a try. And so by the time that I got the Blue Flame, I had planned, because I had read the script at that point, so I had planned to approach several sequences with the intent of just really going hog wild with these, cosmic space ballets that would be throughout the first issue. And that was another thing that got me really excited about that particular project. And so once I employed that, I really felt like I had added a new dimension to what I'm able to do on the page. I did it a bit with Dune, Blood of the Sardaukar, at Boom last year, and I'm doing it again with Godzilla here. The airbrush has really been a big deal for me in terms of how I'm able to implement, tone and gradients and mood and atmosphere. It's just been terrific.
Yeah, it shows, that's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And then apart from that, I've just gotten more proficient at coloring digitally and even illustrating digitally. So, whereas before I was very intimidated by doing full pages entirely digitally. And this year I've been in positions where it's like the only way I'm going to make this work is if I draw these digitally, or, like I'm doing more cover work than I had before. For a long time I would ink the covers and then hand them off to a colorist, but now I'm pretty confident in just finishing covers myself. And then, like some I still draw in color, and then there have been some covers that I've done. The only way to execute the vision I had was to do it entirely in digital form.
Yeah. I hear you speed things up when you go digital.
Yes. I mean, there are certain things that I try to be wary of when I draw digitally. So you don't want your reach to exceed your grasp, in my opinion. So when it comes to things like drawing in perspective and planning in perspective, it's really a lifesaver. I've always felt that my perspective, in particular, like with buildings and stuff like that, it's always been one of my weakest parts of my ability. But I've learned to just invest more time in the drafting and layout stage to plan perspectives, to plan the environments and settings. And having digital tools certainly makes that easier. But you still, in my opinion, need to have a fundamental understanding of how perspective works, how to go for dynamism while also still, without going into the uncanny valley. Even with dynamic perspective, they still have to feel grounded in a way. So I find that sometimes people get these tools and they can use them and they go to town with them, but they lack a fundamental understanding of you can create a space, but there are still rules that exist in that space and you have to play by those rules. So
yeah, back to basics. Yeah. I hear you.
So I'm trying to take what I know and apply that digitally while also not, getting carried away with it. So for me, it's a tricky balance, and I'm really just trying to keep up with so many artists who are doing truly amazing and breathtaking things with digital tools.
Right.
But I'll get there. I'm staying afloat.
There you go. Well, one of the things, I was listening to one of your recent interviews, and you're talking about having to juggle family and work and all this sort of stuff, and that got me thinking about time management being a skill that everyone tries to perfect. So I'm wondering if you have any tips for those who are trying to juggle multiple projects, whether it's creating comic books or laying bricks. Like what do you sort of reach for when you're trying to manage your time? Is there anything that you could pass along, any insightful information?
I have never been terrific at time management. I don't suppose I guess most people aren't, especially freelancers, because you go from feast to famine so easily that at least in my case, I've never really lost my appetite for work. I still have a hungry attitude where I try to get as much work as I can, especially as I said before, like at the pandemic, there's just this fear that it could all go away just so easily. So, from month to month, I try to shore up as much as I can, and then I just make it work. And of course, the problem is that can not leave you with very much time for other things like family or a personal life. And it is a really tricky and fine balance. And it's, I don't have a proven method or anything like that. And so sometimes, different aspects of my life do get sacrificed, and sometimes the work gets sacrificed. And I feel like, I feel like I go back and forth with trying to make up lost time on either side of the fence there. But I think this time around, this year anyway, like last year, I made the mistake of taking on too much all at once. As I said, I had my ongoing series that overlapped with, a Dune special that I was doing, which then overlapped with this Godzilla book on top of other covers. And that was all stuff that I, just sort of dream projects for me, like being a huge Dune fan, really hard to say no to doing a Dune comic,
right.
Being a big Godzilla fan, really hard to say no to getting to write and draw my own Godzilla comic. Going forward, I'm going to be making an effort to not overextend myself in the way that I have in the past few years. And hopefully that'll lead to me being able to work sensible hours. Now, as far as like what I do to try and maintain all that, even when I'm not at my best, it's it's a matter of planning, like looking at keeping a calendar, being aware of how many hours you have in a day, and being realistic about what you can do with them. Right. And then also setting aside hourly breaks, whether it's to just get up and stretch, walk around, clear your head, so that you can come back to your work with fresh eyes. Making time to eat, which, you'd be amazed. But but these are things that are becoming more important simply because I'm, I turned 37 like a week ago. I'm not a young guy anymore. And so I can't.
You're still a youngster. Don't go saying that now.
Well, I can't sit and grind like I used to. So,
right. Yeah.
And realistically, I shouldn't have even been grinding like that in the first place. But, freelancing does funny things to you. So I've had burnout. I've dealt with burnout. Now the game is to try and avoid burnout. And so by that, I keep a schedule of like how many pages I need to get done in a month. And I plot, okay, if I can do this many in a day, then I can set aside these 2 days to relax, give myself space to think, basically that valuable time where you just do nothing and you release that tension. Because creativity is also a muscle, and when your muscle is tense and working all the time, it's going to cramp up on you, and you'll find yourself back to burnout. So that's where I'm at now. And then I haven't been great at it this year. Not always practicing what I preach, but in my defense, it's been tough with the lockdowns and the extended winter breaks and just a lot of the uncertainty. And so I have 2 children, ages 12 and 6, and I have a spouse who has now been working at home for over a year, and we've had to make it work, and it's not always smooth, and we're picking up each other's slack a lot of the time, and relying on the 12-year-olds to pitch in with the 6-year-old. And so it's more of an art than a science. It's like there's days where it's like, okay, well, I know I'm going to be with the kids for the first chunk of the day, and then in the evening I have to roll up the sleeves and really motor. Right. And those are hard days. I also find, to that end, everybody is very understanding of what we're all going through. So, it's not like I'm getting into deep trouble with anybody or anything like that. But I'm also reaching a point now where it's like, I used to think that the worst thing in the world was a book not coming out on time. Comics being a deadline-driven business, it's certainly important. But what I learned was that my life won't end if I prioritize family and self-care above, killing myself to get something done.
Yeah.
Because I find myself, my editors do their best to give me a schedule that I can manage. And so I do have that going for me, but life happens and you got to take it as it comes.
Sure.
And so, not everything pans out to how you schedule it, but I also love doing covers for a number of reasons. Usually because they can sometimes, they're easier. You can get them done faster. It's not quite the commitment that doing interiors is. You can experiment a lot more because of the turnaround. You tend to get paid for them a little faster.
There you go.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of reasons to do covers, but what I find is I fell into a trap where, I was having people reach out to me for a cover that they needed, hey, we need this turned around in a week or even 2 weeks max. Do you think you can do that? Now, if I wasn't already drawing 2 comics, I could. But I find that I just found that I was constantly being asked for covers, hit up for covers that needed like this 2 or 1 week turnaround time, and then finding that those covers wouldn't be solicited for like another 3 to 4 months, and then it would be like cover D of and I have no reason to like be mad because I did a job that I got paid for, but it's like, man, you had me move heaven and earth to get you a cover that is like a retailer 1 in 50 incentive that nobody's going to get their hands on. It's kind of, you sacrifice time to get these things and, under the finish line. And sometimes you can't help but think like, well, I could have, the night that I spent doing this, I could have just as easily had not.
Right. Yeah. It's all about priorities, I guess. That's what it
exactly. So that's what it's all boiling down to. And I feel like I'm at a point now where I've made enough horrendous mistakes with myself where I can now learn from them, hopefully.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Well, we've talked about a lot of stuff, and I'm not don't want to get more on your plate, but you've talked about the Blue Flame, you talked about Godzilla. Is there anything coming up down the road that you can talk about? Any big projects you have on the go?
There's a couple of things in theory that I'm doing over the next course of this next year and a half. The one thing that I know for certain that I feel comfortable confirming is that I'll be writing and drawing a backup story in the next arc of The Silver Coin from Image Comics and by my friend Mike Walsh. So I'll be writing and drawing it. So I'll be, the 4-page backups in every issue in this next arc. And I believe it's 5, if not 6 issues. So Yeah, so it'll be fun to work alongside my good friend Mike Walsh on his book and do something completely different. I have fun writing adventure and science fiction and fantasy, but the Silver Coin being a horror book, it'll be fun to explore all that, and also very challenging in its own right. So
yeah,
I'm very excited about that. But I don't think nobody knows about this except Mike, myself, and now you.
Oh, very good. Well, we'll keep it to ourselves. How about that?
Sure.
Well, you got so much on the go. I'm wondering where you recommend people go to find out about your current and future work. Where do you recommend they go online to find you?
You can usually find me on Instagram and Twitter. My handle for both is at Adam T. Gorham. Now I have a New Year's resolution where I've been taking a little bit of a social media break while I'm finishing up some work. But within a month or so, I'll be back in fine form, posting art regularly. But that's where you can go and catch up with everything that I'm up to and get the latest. So stay tuned.
Thanks to Adam for the chat. You can discover more about Adam on Twitter and Instagram at Adam T. Gorham and online at adamgorham.bigcartel.com. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts. Please leave a good rating. Also check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website and follow along on Twitter at True North Comics. True North Country Comics is now on YouTube. Please like and subscribe to that video channel. Please send your feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. Thanks again for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2022.